Not everything people wait for has a reason. Every evening, the chair was still there. It stood near the edge of the room, slightly angled, as if it had been left mid-thought. Nothing special about it. Wood worn smooth where hands once rested. One leg darker than the others. Not from design, but from years of pressure. It did not move. It never needed to. Someone lived around it. That person moved carefully in the evenings. Not quietly, but deliberately. Steps slowed near the chair, then continued past it. Sometimes a pause happened. Not long enough to be called hesitation. Just long enough to notice the space around it. The light changed before anything else did. It softened. It thinned. Shadows stretched across the floor and reached the chair before they reached anything else. The chair accepted them without resistance. The person noticed this. Not consciously. Not as a thought. It showed in the way the shoulders lowered once the light shifted. As if the day had finally agreed to let go. There was a routine, though no one would have called it that. The same order of small actions. A surface cleared. An object placed down. Hand washed. The chair remained untouched through all of it. Some evenings, the person passed close enough that fabric brushed against the edge of the seat. Other evenings, there was more distance. The chair never adjusted. It never leaned closer. It never pulled away. No one else commented on it. If others were around, their attention moved elsewhere. To walls. To sounds. To themselves. The chair existed outside of their noticing. But he always knew where it was. Even when facing away, the presence of it shaped the room. The empty space around the chair felt intentional, as if it had been preserved, as if something had been planned for later and left unfinished. He did not sit in it. Not because of a rule, not because of a memory that could be named. The body simply chose differently, chose another place, chose to stand, chose to remain in motion just a little longer. Time passed without markers. No clock for checked. No signals announced the end of the evening. The chair stayed. He stayed awake longer than necessary. Eventually, there was stillness. Not sleeping. Just a quieter form of waiting. He stood near the far side of the room. Hands idle. Gaze unfocused. The chair remained in sight. Unchanged. Nothing happened. And yet, something felt unfinished. Every evening ended this way, with the chair exactly where it had been, and the sense that it was holding a place, patiently, for something that had not arrived yet. He moved through the evenings without urgency. Not slow, just unhurried, as if time had already made its decision and there was no need to argue with it. The chair remained where it always was, near enough to be seen, far enough to avoid. He passed it the same way each time, not straight on, slightly to the side, a path that curved just enough to keep his body from aligning with it. The movement felt practiced, though he would not have remembered practicing it. Some evenings, he stopped nearby, close enough to feel the air change around it, close enough to notice the faint unevenness in the floor beneath one leg. His weight shifted from one foot to the other, then back again. The chair did nothing. He did not look at it directly at first. His attention settled on smaller things. The edge of the room, a mark on the wall that had been there longer than he could recall. The way light collected on the floor and faded without ceremony. The chair waited inside his peripheral vision. There were moments when his hand lifted slightly, not reaching, just rising, as if responding to a thought that never fully formed. The hand always lowered again. The motion ended before it became a choice. He stayed standing longer than comfort required. Long enough for tiredness to arrive and pass through him without finding a place to settle. Long enough for the room to feel quieter. Not because sound was gone, but because nothing new was entering. Sometimes he adjusted the chair without sitting in it. Just a fraction of an inch. Enough to straighten it. Enough to feel that it was still solid, still present, still capable of holding weight. He stepped back afterward, as if correcting himself. The evenings did not change much. That was the point. Each one repeated the last with minor differences that only he would have noticed. A shadow slightly longer. A pause slightly heavier. A breath held half a second more than before. The chair remained untouched by those differences. He learned where to place himself in the room so the chair stayed visible without being central. It became part of the background of his awareness, like a sound that never stopped, but was no longer consciously heard. Yet when it was almost time to leave the room, his body always oriented toward it. Not fully, just enough. He lingered then, as if there were still instructions pending, as if something was expected of him, though nothing had been asked. The chair held its position, and he stayed, evening after evening, maintaining the space between himself and the place that had not yet been used. Over time, the space around the chair began to feel heavier. Not visibly, not in a way that could be pointed to. It showed itself in smaller shifts, in how he slowed before passing it, in how his breath changed when he stood near it longer than usual. He had started to remember things without trying. Not events, not scenes, just fragments of sensation. The pressure of weight being lowered. The sound would made when it accepted someone. The way the room once seemed to settle when the chair was finally used. Those memories did not arrive all at once. They surfaced quietly, then disappeared before forming a clear shape. He never followed them, never invited them closer. They came on their own, then left. The chair stayed silent through all of it. Some evenings, he stood directly in front of it, The distance between his knees and the seat was small enough to close with a single motion. His body knew exactly how. It had not forgotten. His muscles tightened anyway. He remained standing, as if waiting for permission that would not be given. The chair offered nothing. It did not signal readiness. It did not resist. It simply remained. There was a moment, more than once, when his balance shifted forward. Not enough to fall, just enough to suggest an ending. Each time, he corrected himself and stepped back. The room felt slightly altered after that, as if it had noticed the near movement, as if it had leaned forward with him and then returned to stillness. He began arranging the rest of the space with more care. Objects aligned. Surfaces cleared more thoroughly. The floor around the chair was kept open. No clutter crossed into that area. The chair became a boundary. He did not think of it as such, but his actions suggested otherwise. He circled it. He preserved it. He treated it as something that required readiness. One evening, he reached out and rested his hand on the back of the chair. The contact lasted longer than before. His fingers pressed lightly into the worn surface. He felt the smoothness, the familiarity. Nothing else happened. He withdrew his hand and stood still, as if listening for something that had not been spoken. The sense beneath everything grew clearer then. Not an answer, not a realization, just an understanding that the chair was not empty. It was occupied by absence, and he was still waiting for the moment when that absence would either leave or finally be acknowledged. By the time the evening reached its quietest point, he no longer wondered what would happen. The question had thinned over time, worn down by repetition. By the way, nothing ever followed it. What remained was simpler. He understood now that the chair was not waiting for him to act. It had never been. The waiting belonged elsewhere. He stood across from it, posture relaxed, shoulders no longer tense. The distance between his body and the seat felt measured, intentional, not a mistake, not unfinished work, just space, held on purpose. He could sit if he wanted to. That was clear to him now. There was no barrier, no rule, no unseen consequence attached to the movement. The chair would not change. The room would not react. Knowing that altered something in him. Quietly, the pull he once felt weakened. Not gone, but no longer demanding. The chair remained what it had always been. Solid. Available. And used. He stayed standing. Not because he was afraid. Not because he expected something else to arrive. Standing had simply become the truest position. The one that matched what was already there. The light faded further. Shadows gathered and released their edges. The room settled into itself without asking anything of him. When he finally turned away, it was not an escape, just a shift in orientation. The chair remained in his awareness, even without his eyes on it. It would still be there tomorrow evening, in the same place, holding the same quiet, and he would still move around it, not as someone waiting for a moment to begin, but as someone who had learned how to live beside what never did. There are things no one says out loud, not because there is nothing to say, but because saying it might change everything. If this story feels familiar, perhaps you understand it better than most.